Okay, ladies and gentlemen, chapter 28, talking now about unemployment. What we're effectively doing is completing the picture here. What does our economy look like? Well, we have three measurements now. We have GDP, we talked about that in 23. We have inflation, we talked about that in 24. Now we're completing the picture with a study of unemployment. Again, we're doctors. We have a patient. The patient is the economy. We want to determine whether it's sick or healthy, and if it's sick, how can we fix it? What do we need to fix? In order to do that, we need the measurements. And now we have a third measurement that we can use as a barometer to judge the health and well-being of our patient, the economy. Let us begin our exploration into the world of employment. First thing we're going to do in this chapter is we're going to study how unemployment is measured, and it is important how it is measured. Next, we're going to figure out what this thing called the natural rate of unemployment is. You can infer that what we're saying is there's always going to be people who are unemployed because it's natural. We're going to figure out what is the natural rate and why it exists. Furthermore, we're going to study what unions are and what minimum wage laws are and how they impact our labor market, how they affect unemployment. Last thing we're going to do, we're going to talk about this concept called efficiency wages and help understand why there are always going to be people unemployed. Let's start answering some of these questions. Before we do, I want to introduce you to an agency. It's called the BLS, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. This morning, October the 4th, they're probably not at work because the government's shut down. But when they are working for the U.S. Department of Labor, they're going to be actively surveying 60,000 households. They can't survey everybody in the United States, but they think that 60,000 households is going to be representative of the employment picture in our nation. They look exclusively at the adult population because they want to focus in on the people who are actually capable of working. 16 years and younger, you're probably in school, so we only focus on those 16 years and older. The BLS is going to start by dividing the population into three groups, and you need to know these. These are extremely important designations. In order to be counted by the BLS, the people who create the unemployment rate, if you are employed per the BLS, you have to have a job. It doesn't matter whether it's part-time or full-time, you just have to be working. And as you can see here, you don't even need to be paid if you're working in a family business. If you make one of these three criteria, you're a paid employee, you're self-employed, or you work for your family but it's unpaid, you are designated per the BLS as employed. And that's different than unemployed, where you have to pass two tests. And don't forget this. This has a huge impact on things. It's people who are not working. That makes sense. That's what it means to be unemployed. But furthermore, you have to be actively seeking out work in the last 4 weeks. If you stop looking for work, the BLS doesn't count you as unemployed, and that skews our data. Don't forget that. Everyone else is not in the labor force. So that brings us to what the heck is the labor force? The labor force is a term we're going to use to describe the number of people who are working, the employed, part-time, full-time, doesn't matter, plus the number of unemployed, those who want to be working and are doing something about it. They've actively sought work in the 4 weeks, in the previous 4 weeks. Labor force is employed plus unemployed. Now, you don't see much about those. They don't tell you the size of the labor force usually every month, but every month you're going to get data on the unemployment rate. It's talked about by every news agency, and it's the focus of a lot of people's attention, particularly policymakers. The unemployment rate is the percentage of the labor force that is unemployed. Those who are out of work and are actively seeking, what percentage of the labor force are those people? Here's our calculation. It's the number of unemployed plus the labor force. Don't forget that the labor force is those who are employed plus those who are unemployed. You're going to have to do this. Remember, your test is Thursday. Don't forget it. Number of unemployed over the labor force times 100 is going to give us the percentage of the people who want a job and are doing something about it but don't have one as a percentage of the labor force. However, this isn't going to give us a complete picture. There's going to be some things that can skew this number. This is something that comes out every month, and it helps us really understand what this unemployment rate did, if it changed at all. The labor force participation rate is the percentage of those who are of working age, the adult population, that is in the labor force. So employed plus unemployed. The way we figure it out is just take the size of the labor force, again, employed and unemployed, over everybody who's of working age, multiply it by 100, and we get the percentage of our adult population, the working age population, who are either working or actively seeking work. And that completes the picture, really, of what's happening with employment. So, now let's calculate a few of these things. First thing we need to do is figure out what's the size of the labor force. To do that, we need a calculator, because I can't, in my head, add up these numbers. But remember, the labor force is the number of employed plus the number of unemployed. So this is very simple. It's 139.7 plus 13.7 gives us a labor force of 153.4. That's how many people are working or are not working and are doing something about it. That's our labor force. The unemployment rate is then very simple. We just take the number of people who are actively seeking work but don't currently have it, 13.7, all right, and we divide that. So we take 13.7 and we divide it by our labor force, multiply it by 100 to get a percent, so 13.7 divided by 153.4 times 100 is going to give us an unemployment rate of 8.93%. I'll give you a little insight here. This is not a healthy economy. Your patient is sick, and there's probably some efforts by policymakers to remedy this. We'll learn about those later. But now let's complete the picture, because I said this is going to be ever-changing, and we want to know what's happening to the real number here, or to the real employment picture. And this only gives us part. So let's figure out how many adults we have in this society. Everyone over 16, we have this many people, 139.7 plus 13.7, plus those who are choosing not to work for whatever reason. There's 239.1 million people who are of working age per the BLS. Now, how many of them are choosing to work or are actively seeking work? So we would take the size of the labor force, 153.4, divided by 239.1, multiply it by 100, and we get 64.1. So we take 153.4 times that, multiply 100, and we get 64.16. That's what percentage of the adult population is actively seeking work or is currently working. This gives us a sense for what's happening with the employment picture in our country. Don't forget how to do these calculations. You're going to have to do plenty of them. So here are our calculations. As we can see, I got the first one right, I got the second one right, I got the third one right, and I got the fourth one right. Fantastic stuff. Now, an interesting graph here. You can see the changing nature of the labor market in the United States. This used to be a male-dominated world. We used to leave females on the sidelines. Today, we don't do that, and we're much better off for it. GDP has risen. It's a more fair and equitable society, and we see that women have taken the opportunity. Once they were given it, they've run with it. 35%, 34% working in 1950. Today, it's over 60%. Not quite up to what males are. Males, you can see there, have gone on the decline here. Almost 90% working in 1950. But in 2010, we're down near 70%. But greater equity in the world. That's the labor force participation rates, broken down male and female. Now, just like GDP, just like inflation, we need to understand that there are qualifiers. It's not a perfect statistic. It's just the best that we have. Just as every doctor's tool doesn't have, or is not without its imperfections. There's side effects to everything. There are limitations to everything in this world. I'm sorry, it's not perfect. So what are the limitations for the unemployment rate? We're going to give 3 scenarios and hopefully illuminate things that are wrong or that give you pause with the unemployment rate. First scenario is going to be Sue loses her job and begins immediately looking for a new one. The next one, John, he's out of work for since his mill closed last year and becomes so discouraged that he stops looking for work. That's scenario number 2. Number 3, Sam gets fired, or loses his job. He was $80,000 as a research scientist. Now he's working for McDonald's on a part-time basis. These are the 3 scenarios, and we're going to look at what happens to the unemployment rate, which again is communicating what the employment picture looks like, and see whether it's a true representation of the labor market. So, sorry, let's go back there, right? I jumped the gun. It says Sue lost her job and begins looking for a new one. Well, I'm not going to be counted as unemployed. I don't have a job and I'm looking for a new one. I passed the 2 tests. The BLS counts me. The unemployment rate, because I'm now unemployed and I wasn't unemployed formerly, rises. This is giving us the impression that the labor market is worsening. And it is. Unemployment rate did its job. It captured this worsening of the labor market. But let's take a look at our next scenario. John stops looking for work, but he doesn't have a job. Would he like to work? It seems it. But he stopped looking because he's so discouraged because he can't find a job and he's been at it for so long. Discouraged workers is a new category of people we're going to talk about. They'd like to work, but they've given up looking. Because they've given up, they don't pass that second test, the BLS forgets about them. They're not in the labor force. They're not in the unemployed. Because of that, the unemployment rate will actually fall. When people become discouraged and leave the labor force, even though they want to be working, the BLS doesn't count them, unemployment falls. It looks like things are improving. They most certainly are not. The impression is wrong. The unemployment rate is communicating something we don't want it to. But we can't capture this. You have to be seeking out a job. You have to prove it to the BLS. Last scenario. We have this guy, Sam, who's now working at McDonald's part-time. If you're working part-time, full-time in a job you like and a job you hate, and a job that matches your skills or doesn't match your skills, it doesn't matter. BLS counts you as employed. The unemployment rate is unchanged. So, what we're saying is, the employment picture isn't worsening, but it certainly is. This guy's got skills that should be used elsewhere. He could benefit society by being a research scientist, but instead he's working at McDonald's. Things are worse, but it's not captured in the unemployment rate. Those are the imperfections. Don't forget about them. So, sorry. It says, what does the unemployment rate really measure? Is it perfect? No. But it does give us a sense for what joblessness looks like, and it gives us a pretty good measurement of the health of the labor market. It's not perfect though. So it's going to exclude discouraged workers. That's a problem. It does not distinguish between full-time and part-time, people who are working in the jobs that best fit them or don't fit them very well. It doesn't matter. Some people actually misreport their working status, which again skews the numbers. But if you look at all these imperfections and you're saying, hey, we have to have some measurement, the unemployment rate actually does a pretty good job of giving us a barometer of the labor market, which then can be extended to the economy as a whole. Don't forget these things. Now, what you're going to see here is that economists really don't focus so much up here on the people who are unemployed for a short period of time. Because even though this makes up a good chunk of the unemployed, it's 2/3 of the people who are unemployed are going to be so for less than 3 months, or about 3 months. We think that they're probably able to endure that period. They probably have a safety net themselves. The government provides a safety net. So these people aren't very concerning. However, the people who are long-term unemployed, those people are concerning. There are people who have been out of work for 6 months or more. These are the people that the unemployment rate really captures, and this is the unfortunate, because as each month passes, your skills erode. It becomes increasingly more difficult to find a job. And these are the people that policymakers usually try to help out with whatever policies they can come up with. But remember, just as always, there's unintended consequences. Sometimes they want to help these people out, but sometimes they actually hurt them. Now, let's start into the second real focus here of the employment picture. The fact that it is natural for every year, every moment for people to be unemployed. It is natural or normal. So let's first define what the natural rate of unemployment is. It is the normal rate of unemployment around which the actual unemployment rate fluctuates. They're not going to do this for you, but I'm going to tell you that in the United States, the natural rate of unemployment is 5 to 6%. Those people who want a job but can't find one and are doing something about it, what's natural is for that to be 5 or 6%. But it's always going to fluctuate above and below this because our economy goes in cycles. You have rises or expansions where we're adding jobs. Then you have declines where we have recessions, we're shedding jobs. So what we see is that cyclical unemployment is the difference between the actual and the natural. Today, Okay, we're looking at about 7% unemployment, a little bit above that. So that means that there is maybe about 1% still cyclical unemployment. Or the natural rate is actually higher than we presume. Either one could be the case. We just don't have the tools yet to answer that. But cyclical is the difference between actual, which today is about 7%, and whatever we designate as the natural rate of unemployment, which most economists will tell you are about 5 to 6%. So let's take a look at natural and the actual. Natural here is the blue line. You can see it's about 5 or 6%. But the red line is actual unemployment. We are rarely at the natural rate of unemployment. We're always fluctuating at or around it. Here you can see where unemployment is rising. This was a deep, deep recession. Here, unemployment is rising. A deep, deep recession. But as we come down off that recession, you can see we are adding jobs. This is an expansion period. So we're always fluctuating in or around the natural rate. We'll talk more about this as we continue our study of economics. Now let's figure out why the heck this is the case. Why do we have, naturally, all these people who are unemployed? Well, first thing, we have something called frictional unemployment. Friction is created by rubbing, or contact between two things. So the contact here, the friction, is the time you're spending between jobs. We say it is quite natural for individuals to take some time to find a job that best suits their skills and their tastes. When individuals are involved in this job search, which is usually pretty short, we would designate them as frictionally unemployed. So it's natural for people to always be kind of in search of a job. Okay? Frictional unemployment is then going to get added together with something we call structural unemployment. That's when we have fewer jobs than there are workers. There's going to be something structural about a labor market that creates a surplus of workers. This is usually longer term. Together, frictional and structural create the natural rate. There's only two things that make up the natural rate. It's frictional plus structural. Don't forget that. Write it down. These are the two components of what we see as the natural rates. Let's talk a little bit more about the job search. Workers have different tastes and skills. The job search is that process of making a marriage between employer and employee. It makes sense for this to take some time. Always, our economy is shifting. This is creative destruction. Industries rise and others fall. They move from region A to region B. Those are called sectoral shifts. This is going to put people out of work. And they're going to be in search of work, either retraining themselves or moving from this part of the country to that part of the country where our skills are still required. These things generate that frictional unemployment. Okay? The economy is always changing. Now, what government does is it actually tries to increase the pace of that. The government agencies try to create marriages. They try to fill job vacancies with workers who have those skills. Today, job agencies are not that prevalent because we have the wonderful internet where we know about jobs and people can apply for them. Public training programs also exist, and this is going to be really, really important for sectoral shifts. Industries are rising, others are falling. So sometimes we have skills that are no longer relevant. We need to retrain people. So government tries to have public training programs for those individuals to account for those sectoral shifts and reduce the frictional unemployment. The last thing we do here is we need to talk about unemployment insurance. When you lose your job, you're not going to have a paycheck from your former employer. That's going to be problematic because you still need to live. So what the government does is it softens the blow. It's going to give you a small paycheck, a percentage of what you used to be making, called unemployment insurance. But here is the most important thing. How does that impact people's decisions? Remember, we're talking about how quickly are people going out and finding that new job. How can we affect, or how is this going to affect frictional unemployment? The more generous unemployment insurance benefits become, the more likely it is that you take your time finding that job because your incentives have changed. When you find that new job, your unemployment benefits are going to go away. So, for some people, they actually say, you know what, I'll take a little vacation. I'll take my time to find the best job because I'm getting a little paycheck from the government. So this distorts incentives, and the more generous our unemployment insurance becomes, the more likely it is that frictional unemployment increases. So then why do we do it? Well, there's a lot of uncertainty that comes over income. If I lose my job, that's going to be extraordinarily painful. I got a house payment, I got kids to pay for, I got food to buy. All these things become less uncertain when I give you a little help. And we think it's actually appropriate for you to take some time to find the job that best fits you, because that translates into higher productivity for us. That's better for our economy. Now, the last thing we need to do here is talk about what is structural unemployment. Hopefully, we recognize this. This is supply and demand, and this is the labor market. I apologize about how long this is taking, but if you bear with me, we're almost done. This is a price. It's just the price of labor. It's a wage. L stands for quantity. What this is showing you is the equilibrium wage and the equilibrium number of employees in this labor market. There's a difference though. Supply is not made up of producers. These are laborers. These are people who want to work. This shows their tastes and preferences to work at all possible wages. Demand here is represented by firms. These are people who want to, obtain employees. They want to buy a factor of production. We want to figure out what structural unemployment is, and we use this to help us out. Structural unemployment occurs when there's not enough jobs to go around. In this situation, we're at equilibrium. Everybody who wants to work at this wage gets a job. But what if we are above equilibrium? What if we're at W1? Take a look at how many people want to work. QS stands for how many laborers want a job at this wage. They're enticed to work because that's very lucrative. But take a look at how many people firms want to hire. You would say that this represents a surplus of workers. We have too many people for too little jobs. That, my friend, is unemployment. We have created something structural. There's not enough jobs to go around. That's an example of structural unemployment. And there's 3 reasons for this. Let's go through this quickly. First thing, minimum wage laws. A policy designed to help people out actually sometimes ends up hurting them. It helps out when we draw a graph. Remember, this is the wage, this is the quantity, that's supply, that's demand. We have our equilibrium wage, we have our equilibrium quantity of workers. Well, policymakers decide that it's unconscionable to have people getting paid $5 an hour, even though it's the equilibrium minimum wage. You can't live on that. So they say, you know what? Let's put in a price floor. That's what the minimum wage is. Let's set it at $8 an hour. Well, what does that do? That entices a lot of people to go out and start looking for those jobs. But what does it do to firms? Firms don't want to hire anymore, or don't want to hire as many, because I got to pay each and every one more. What the heck did that do? Take a look at how many people were working. That arrow represents how many people were working. Now take a look at how many are working now. The difference here is new unemployment. We intended to help people out, but we ended up hurting the labor market here. Minimum wages, if they're set above equilibrium, are going to create unemployment. Structural unemployment. Also, unions, they're designed to help out workers. They give people, or they work for higher wages, better benefits, and more safe and just working conditions. Unions are going to exert tremendous influence on firms. 100,000 people are going to speak as one. But again, the question is, what the heck does it do to the unemployment picture? That's what we're trying to study here. Well, this is the equilibrium. Again, I'm just going to put price because that's what a wage is. And this is the equilibrium quantity, QE. If they're able to win concessions and drive up wages benefits, maybe this is now the wage. Look at what that would do to how many people want to work. Look at that, what it does to firms. We call that again a surplus. Unions, they're helping workers out, but only a select few. We can categorize here. Let's take a look at this. We now created winners called insiders who remain on the job and are better off. They're getting paid higher wages. But we got outsiders, those who lost their job, and they're definitely worse off because I'm out of work. So where do they go? Oftentimes they go to non-unionized labor jobs. that shifts that supply curve further to the right, that drives down further those wages, and it creates this huge gap between those who work in union jobs and non-union jobs. So a deep impact unions can have. Okay? So, we say, are unions good? It depends on what your perspective is. There are critiques. They raise wages above equilibrium and they create unemployment. But at the same time, they make firms responsive to workers' concerns, which we say probably is a pretty good thing. So we just need to be measured here with our critiques and our, our laudatory terms that we're going to use here, our applause of unions. So just be aware of that. Last thing, we're almost done here. The theory of efficiency wages. Firms are going to voluntarily pay above equilibrium wages. Why? Wait. Why are firms going to voluntarily pay people more than they have to? Well, they think it boosts worker productivity, and it is so for 4 reasons. So let's take a look at the 4 reasons why firms might voluntarily pay people more than they have to. 1 says worker health here. Particularly in the less developed world, poor nutrition is a huge problem. So there, if you pay people more, the idea is that they're going to eat better. If you eat better, you're going to be healthier. When you're healthier, when you're happier, you are more productive. So we might say, yeah, equilibrium wage is $3 an hour, but instead I'm going to pay you $4 an hour because that's going to allow you to have a better diet. That better diet is going to translate into health outcomes, and that's going to translate into productivity, and I like productivity gains. That's reason number 1 why we might artificially hold wages high and create some structural unemployment. Worker turnover. Jobs are very different in different areas. Different companies have different customs and ways of operating. So they don't like to be constantly training people. So how do you keep people on the job? How do you prevent worker turnover? Well, you make it costly to leave. So you make it such that you're paying more than anywhere else, so that people say, if I leave this job, I'm going to have to take a pay cut. Therefore, I don't leave. And that company doesn't have to train those people. Those people become experts in that company, and we get greater productivity. It's all, again, about that productivity. Worker quality. How do you attract quality workers? Well, if you pay above equilibrium, you're going to attract the very, very best workers. So this is another reason why efficiency wages might be used, and why we keep wages above equilibrium and create structural unemployment. The last thing, worker effort. There's a lot of ways that we can monitor people. We can put cameras on them. We can walk around constantly, make sure people are doing the right thing. Or just pay them above equilibrium. Because if I do that, they know that maybe one day, I'll stop by and see what's going on. And if you're doing something irresponsible, boom, here's your pink slip, goodbye. You're not doing the right thing. And that's going to be extremely costly because you might be able to find a job, but not a job that pays that well. So I have created a system for monitoring behavior just by paying people more. These are efficiency wages, or this is the reasons why people pay efficiency wages, and remember that's outcome. Greater amounts of structural unemployment and greater amounts of structural translate into higher natural rates. Okay? So, this is going to be an exercise that you can look at on the PowerPoint. Go ahead and feel free to do so. Otherwise, I'm done. I'm actually going to skip ahead and tell you to look this summary. You can go look at this. But what do I want to do? I say, that's all, folks. Go fill out the response form. Chapter 28, Unit 2, finished.